I never thought a single morning could feel like a lifetime. The sun was spilling gold across my apartment floor, but I hardly noticed it. My phone buzzed insistently on the marble countertop, vibrating against the rim of my coffee mug. I picked it up with fingers still trembling, not from caffeine, but from the memory that had haunted me for years. The news alert flashed across the screen. 911 recording released. Fire response under scrutiny. My stomach dropped. I knew instantly what it meant. It had been 12 years, but the memory was still raw. The smoke alarms that never shrieked, the frantic scrambling, the helpless screams. My little sister gone, and all we could do was try. I ran my fingers over the silk of my blouse, grounding myself. My apartment smelled faintly of jasmine and burnt coffee, a sharp contrast to that night. From the window, the city looked peaceful, indifferent, as if life had moved on without waiting for me. But I hadn't. I'd been living in quiet vigilance, hiding the pieces of my heart that refused to heal. And now, a single recording threatened to pull all the carefully stacked layers of my life apart. My palms were sweaty, my thoughts racing. Could I survive hearing it? Or would it destroy the delicate balance I had spent years building? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It was time to confront the past. I can still feel the heat of that night, even though it was years ago. I was 16, clutching my little sister's hand as smoke curled around us like a living thing, choking, suffocating. The alarms never went off. Nothing warned us. Just the crackling of flames and the acrid sting of smoke in our lungs. I shouted her name until my voice gave out, but the world seemed deaf, indifferent. Our parents had been asleep. I banged on doors, yelled, screamed, anything to get someone to listen, but it felt like the walls themselves were against me. When we finally made it outside, my chest heaving, eyes burning, the fire truck arrived too late. The firefighters looked at me, puzzled, like the responsibility wasn't theirs to bear. We tried to save her. I choked out, trembling, but their faces told me it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. I remember clutching the pendant my grandmother had given me, a tiny silver star. "When the world feels out of control," she'd said softly, pressing it into my palm, "hold on to this. It's a reminder that you have the power to survive, even when everything else fails." That night, the star burned against my fingers as I sat shivering on the curb, watching my sister's favorite blanket smolder in the fire's glow. The world seemed smaller then, sharper and unbearably cruel. I felt abandoned, dismissed, invisible, but also awake to the fragility of life and to the fact that I couldn't rely on anyone else to protect me. Not fully. Not ever. By the time the smoke cleared, I had made a decision I didn't yet have words for. I would survive. I would build a life so solid, so unshakable, that no fire, literal or metaphorical, could ever take me down again. I didn't speak much about that night. Most people assumed I was just a quiet, awkward teenager, the type who didn't like attention. But beneath that quiet exterior, I was building something, an invisible armor made of determination and grief. I held my grandmother's silver star tightly in my pocket every day, a reminder that I could survive, and someday I would thrive. College wasn't easy. I worked 2 jobs, juggling night shifts at a bookstore with early classes. Exhaustion was my constant companion, but I learned to use it. Every late night, I reminded myself, this is temporary. This is the foundation. I met my first mentor there, Professor Lillian Hayes, a sharp, exacting woman in her 50s who saw potential in me that I didn't yet see in myself. She pushed me relentlessly, refusing to let me settle for mediocrity. "Chloe," she said one evening, handing me a stack of research papers, "the world doesn't owe you understanding. You owe yourself excellence." I remember nights sitting on my tiny dorm bed, reading and writing until my eyes blurred, whispering to the silver star, promising that one day I would turn survival into strength. Small wins came first. My first research publication, a scholarship for independent study, then a job offer I hadn't dared hope for. With each milestone, I felt pieces of my old fear dissolve. Even as I climbed, I kept my success private. My family thought I was struggling, and I didn't correct them. I didn't need validation from the people who had failed me when it mattered most. My apartment became my sanctuary, filled with books, notes, and quiet reminders that I was more than the girl who couldn't save her sister. Years later, I launched my own consulting firm, focusing on helping families navigate crises. It was ironic, almost poetic. The girl who had been powerless now had the tools, the knowledge, the voice to influence change. And yet, I rarely shared this publicly. Social media only saw snapshots, a modest coffee post, a city skyline at sunset. Behind those glimpses, I was growing, thriving, conquering, unseen and untouchable. I had learned the most important lesson. Survival alone wasn't enough. Success without self-respect, without control, was hollow. I vowed to build a life where I held the power, where I could help others, but never let anyone take it from me again. The silver star, tucked safely in my jewelry box now, glinted under the soft light of my office. Every day, it reminded me of the fire, the smoke, and the girl who had refused to break. That girl was still inside me, sharper and stronger than ever. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, echoing through the polished halls of my penthouse. My heart didn't race, not with fear, but with anticipation. I had been expecting them, my parents, their eyes full of the usual mixture of guilt and denial. They thought I was still fragile, the haunted teenager who had barely survived the fire. They had no idea who they were about to meet. I opened the door. The sight of them, aged a little, frilier in ways I hadn't noticed in years, made the familiar ache in my chest flare. But I didn't falter. I led them inside. The apartment smelled faintly of sandalwood and citrus. Expensive art adorned the walls, a mix of bold abstracts and quiet landscapes. My office was neat, paper stacked, a sleek laptop humming softly. Everywhere, the space spoke of a life carefully curated, a life they had no idea I had built. They lingered in the living room, eyes wide, glancing from the marble countertops to the delicate sculpture on the shelf. I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of their assumptions settle into the air. Then finally I spoke. "You think I've been struggling all these years," I said, my voice calm, deliberate. "You think I needed your help. But the truth is, I've been thriving. I built this life. Every bit of it. On my own." Their faces shifted, shock, disbelief, shame. My mother's hands trembled, reaching instinctively for something to hold, while my father stared at me like he'd never seen me before. "I run a consulting firm that helps families navigate crises," I continued, letting the words land softly but firmly. "I'm financially independent. I've published research, mentored young women, and my work has impacted thousands. And all of this," I gestured to the apartment, "is mine. I built it from nothing but a promise to survive." They were silent, each word sinking in like the weight of years of absence and failure. I could see the guilt forming in their eyes, a shadow that had taken too long to reach them. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth, by itself, was enough. I moved to the window, letting the city lights shimmer behind me. "You failed to save her," I said softly, my voice carrying the memory of that night. "You weren't there when it mattered. And yet, I survived. I made sure that her memory became a strength, not a chain." The air was thick, heavy with what had been unsaid for over a decade. And then a subtle shift. I could see them beginning to understand that the child they thought they knew was gone. In her place stood a woman they could barely comprehend, self-assured, accomplished, and unbreakable. I walked back toward them, my silver star in hand, placing it on the coffee table. "This," I said, "reminds me of that night. Not of fear, not of loss, but of resilience. I want you to remember it too." They stared at the small token, and for the first time in years, I saw a glimmer of humility, a recognition that the girl they had dismissed had become something they could no longer ignore. The room was quiet, heavy with tension, but I felt lighter than I had in years. I had the upper hand now, not in revenge, not in anger, but in truth and clarity. The girl who had once been powerless now had the authority to set boundaries, to demand growth, and to protect herself. "I'm willing to have you in my life," I said, meeting their eyes steadily. "But there are conditions. You need to understand that the old patterns can't continue." My mother shifted uneasily. I waited. "You must face your guilt," I continued. "Not to punish yourselves, but to understand the impact of your absence. Therapy, reflection, accountability, these are non-negotiable." My father swallowed hard. "And for you," I said, "it isn't enough to simply apologize. You need to channel your regret into action, helping others, learning to respond, to protect, to prevent. Only then can you move forward." I could see the heaviness in their shoulders lighten slightly, as though a weight I hadn't carried alone was finally being acknowledged. But I didn't stop there. No more hiding behind pride or excuses. Toxic habits, avoidance, judgment, they're all out. I won't allow them near my life. If you want to be part of my world, you change. You grow. You heal. I held up the silver star, turning it between my fingers. This isn't just a symbol of survival. It's a promise to myself and to her memory. You will honor that promise too, if you wish to remain in my life. It wasn't cruelty. It was empowerment. I could have let anger drive me, but I chose strength instead. Compassion was powerful, but so was firmness. I wasn't the same scared teenager who had pounded on doors that night. I was the woman who had refused to break, who had taken tragedy and forged it into purpose. They nodded slowly, a hesitant acceptance settling in. It wasn't perfect, and I knew there would be stumbles. But for the first time in years, I felt that balance shift. The dynamic that had left me hollow was now realigned. I could help, guide, and hold the space for growth, but only if they were willing to do the work. I let the silence linger, letting my words sink in. This was my world, my terms. And for the first time, the people who had failed me understood that my strength wasn't just resilience. It was authority, wisdom, and unshakable self-respect. I placed the silver star back in my palm, feeling its reassuring weight. The fire, the smoke, the loss, they were no longer chains. They were the foundation of a life I had built brick by brick, on my terms. Weeks passed, and I watched quietly as the changes unfolded. My parents didn't transform overnight, but they tried. My mother started therapy, talking openly about her regrets instead of hiding them behind forced smiles. My father volunteered at the local fire safety program, teaching families how to respond, how to prevent what had happened to us. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. I noticed small moments that warmed me unexpectedly. My mother leaving a note with coffee for me before work, my father asking questions about my projects with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Each gesture was a thread, weaving a new pattern of trust, understanding, and cautious hope. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about letting go of the past. It was about building a future strong enough to include the lessons of loss. Sitting in my office one evening, I touched the silver star again. It had been with me through fire, fear, and the long, quiet nights of rebuilding. It had been my anchor, my silent reminder that I could endure and rise. And now, it was a testament to the life I had forged, a life defined not by tragedy, but by resilience, clarity, and choice. I thought of my sister, her laugh echoing faintly in my memory, and I whispered a promise I had kept all these years, to honor her by living fully, by being fearless, by creating something lasting from the ashes of loss. The city lights glimmered outside my window, serene and indifferent. But inside, I felt a peace I had never known, a balance between memory and forward motion, sorrow and triumph. The woman I had become was not the frightened girl who had failed to save her sister. She was someone stronger, wiser, unshakable. And I knew, with that quiet certainty, that whatever came next, I would meet it with grace, with courage, and with the power of a life reclaimed. I glanced once more at the silver star, letting its weight sink into my palm. Then I smiled softly, a single, steady breath filling me. I survived the fire, I honored her memory, and I will never be powerless again.